So I just want to thank you all so much for being here, for joining us for tonight's event. I'm Emily. I'm one of the event hosts here at Powell's. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. In the next couple of days, we're looking forward to welcoming Jim Tankersley on August 19th and Lisa Hannawalt on August 20th, among many others. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also sign up for our weekly events email at powells.com. So tonight, we're honored to welcome William Deresiewicz in conversation with Kate Bingaman-Burt and Lisa Congdon. He's a New York Times bestselling author of Excellent Sheep and a Jane Austen Education, an award-winning essayist and critic, frequent speaker at colleges and other venues, and former professor of English at Yale. Kate Bingaman-Burt is a professor of graphic design at Portland State University. She's the author of Obsessive Consumption, What Did You Buy Today? And is working on an upcoming book titled Starts with a Sketch. Lisa Congdon is best known for her colorful graphic drawings and hand lettering. She's the author of 8 books, including her latest, Find Your Artistic Voice, The Essential Guide to Working on Your Creative Magic. In The Death of the Artist, I'm so sorry. Bill argues that we are in the midst of a transformation. If artists with artisans in the Renaissance, bohemians in the 19th century, and professionals in the 20th, a new paradigm is emerging in the digital age, one that is changing our fundamental ideas about the nature of art and the role of the artist in society. So this event also includes a Q&A. You can see the Q&A bottom of the bottom of your screen. I can see someone's already got a question in there. If you don't see it, try tapping that little more button and it should pop up. There's also a chat feature. I'll be sharing a link to the book multiple times throughout the event this evening. And perhaps most importantly, please consider supporting Bill and Powell's by purchasing a copy of The Death of the Artist. Now, I will leave it up to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone for coming. Thank you so much to Kate and Lisa for doing this. You were already so generous with your time when I interviewed you for the book, and now you're doing this with me, and I'm so glad that you are. So I'm going to talk for like 15 minutes just to present the book, and then we'll go from there. I wrote this book because I had a question that I wanted to answer for myself and for others. There are 2 stories that you hear about making a living as an artist in the digital age that I've been hearing for a long time. The first one, I think the one that circulates more widely, is that there's never been a better time to be an artist. This is the line that's peddled by Silicon Valley and a lot of other people. And there's never been a better time, the argument goes, because you can, just make your own stuff, shoot your movie on your iPhone, put your music together on your laptop, and then, of course, distribute it for free. You can circumvent the gatekeepers. You can just put your stuff out there and have a wonderful creative career. That's true up to a point, up to the last point about having a wonderful creative career by just putting your stuff out there. Because the other story comes from actual artists themselves, and they say, yeah, you can just put your stuff out there, but how are you going to get anybody to pay you for it? The same internet that's made it so easy to put your stuff out there has also driven the price of content to 0 or close to 0. Ever since Napster with music, right? A lot of art is free or very, very cheap. Music, writing, visual art, film and television. I'm inclined to believe the artists. I don't trust Silicon Valley. I think the artists are in a better position to know. Their argument just makes more sense to me. But my question was, people are still making art, so how are they doing it? And people are still making a living making art, or at least making part of a living making art. So how, not a rhetorical question, an actual question, like how are they actually doing it? And the answer is the book, or most of the book, as I'll explain in a few minutes. I set about answering the question mainly by interviewing people like Lisa and Kate and about 140 other people, artists, mostly artists of all kinds, and also, editors and producers and so academics. In the book, I start by talking about the broad conditions that are shaping the lives, the financial lives of artists today. So yes, the internet, but also the incredible increase in housing costs in rent, especially in the cities where artists tend to center themselves, the increase in tuition for things like college and art school, the decline of cultural institutions, both nonprofit and for-profit, that help support artists, museums and orchestras and publishers and record labels. What I say in short is that there is bad news, which is that everything pays much less. There's good news, which is that there are indeed tons of new opportunities that have been opened up by the internet, and you really can all do it yourself, as opposed to having to, rely on the culture industry, get an agent, get a manager, whatever. And then there's bad news about the good news. There are tons of new opportunities and millions of people pursuing them. And I literally mean millions of people pursuing them. You can do it yourself, but you also have to.
Panel.
So that's what you might, so that is what you might call, I don't use these terms in the book, it's not an economics textbook, but you might call that the macroeconomics, the big conditions. And then I turn to the microeconomics, which is just the nuts and bolts of doing it yourself, of being, as one painter put it, a one-man band or single person small business. Self-marketing, self-production, self-promotion, things like that. And then I drill down even more with a chapter on each of the 4 major arts that I talk about in the book, writing, music, visual art, film and television. And because I really want to get and give the reader as precise an understanding of how things work and what's going on now as I can. Going even further into specificity, each chapter includes profiles of half a dozen artists, or in one case, an artistic partnership. One of those artists is Lisa Congdon. I have, 6 writers, 6 musicians, 6 visual artists, and so forth. I'm going to read one of those in a minute, not Lisa's. But first, just to say, I said before that that's the answer to my question is most of the book. I also have a section where I talk about how I think these new circumstances are changing both art and especially the role of the artist in society, because those things have changed. They have not been eternal and stable, and I think they're changing again. Basically, what happens to art, what happens to artists when artists are fully immersed in the market like never before. And then I conclude with a section about what needs to be done, or some of what needs to be done. There's a chapter on art schools and what needs to happen there, a chapter on piracy and copyright, and the evil doings of big tech, because that's a very big part of all of this. That's why big tech is in my subtitle. And finally, a chapter on the way that artists are organizing to fight back, and the larger social reforms, structural reforms that I think are necessary. So let me read, to give you a flavor of what the book is doing and how specific the book gets. I'm going to read one of those profiles, and it's one of the writers. Nicole Dieker is pretty much the ideal person to have tried to self-publish a work of literary fiction. Dieker grew up in small-town Missouri, the older of 2 daughters of a piano teacher and a music professor. Her upbringing taught her to value the arts, but above all, she told me, it taught her to practice. Quote, the idea that every day you're going to sit down at your instrument and you're going to try to get better at it, that taught me as much about how to be an artist as the actual art itself. In college in her 20s, she studied music and theater and tried to make it as a musician before realizing that she didn't have the talent for an actual career. One day, to earn some extra money, she started writing for Crowdsource, which she calls one of those content sites that people slag on because they pay so badly, taking micro gigs like writing recipes for food.com for $5 a piece. She turned out to be really good at it, and more important, really fast. Writing was the first thing where people kept asking me for more, she said. So she started pitching other sites and hustling for other gigs and tracking her income to make sure that she was earning more each week. And 5 years later, now I'm here, she said. Here being a flourishing freelance career. In 2013, her first year of full-time writing, she earned about $40,000. 3 years later, she was up to more than twice that. Speed was still her secret weapon, along with meticulous organization and a musician's sense of discipline. In 2016, I have trouble believing this every time I read this, even though I actually wrote it myself. She accepted more than 700 assignments and published over 500,000 words. This book that we're talking about tonight is not a short book. 500,000 words is 4 times the length of the book in 1 year. Meanwhile, she was working on a novel. It was a fictionalized version of her family story. She added a third sister. She called it kind of Little Women for Millennials. That's how she explained it to me. She wrote it as a series of discrete vignettes, about 3 to 5 pages each, both because she was used to composing in that kind of length and because she had to fit the writing in around her other work somehow. How did she manage that? She's writing 500,000 words a year. I asked her that, and she said, I practiced. That same discipline that she developed as a kid. The result, The Biographies of Ordinary People in 2 volumes, is a lovely, unpretentious story suffused with feeling that unfolds at the speed of life. When Dieker was ready, she queried agents, which is what you do if you want to, publish a commercial book, all of whom told her that the book was not sufficiently commercial for a mainstream press, which is not an unusual thing to be told if you're a novelist. One of them said you could publish it some other way as what this agent called an art book. Dieker thought, you just said I made art. That's all I ever wanted. But she actually also wanted to publish it, which meant she decided to self-publish it. And since she was such a prolific blogger, as she got the venture going, she started a new blog called This Week in Self-Publishing to document the process. It reads, in retrospect, like a novel about putting out a novel, complete with plot twists and dramatic ironies and a passage from innocence to experience. The story begins about 4 months before volume 1 is released. She hopes to sell 5,000 copies, which is a lot, even for a commercial novelist, including 300 to 500 pre-orders by publication day. It's clear that she's already done a ton of groundwork. As her self-publishing platform, and there are well over a dozen, she's chosen Pronoun, which she loves. It's enabled her to do comparative cover research, Amazon category research, and price research, provides her with advanced reading copies, which you need to send to reviewers, and gives her a great-looking order site. Her only worry is that if Pronoun should ever be shut down, she'll lose the novel's ISBN number. That's the unique commercial product code that's on the back of every book, which would take her metrics and sales data with it. She would lose all of those too. So over the next few months, we watch her send the book out for reviews, place articles about it, tap her freelance network for marketing leads, do podcasts, plan a tour, defend herself from sounding calculating and strategic, and remind us that although she wrote the book for love, she can't, quote, just fling words into the sky without any dream of long-term financial stability. A month and a half before the launch, she loses all of the pre-orders she received through Amazon, which needless to say is most of them, because of a glitch in Pronoun software. By publication day, Dieker has sold 109 copies. Remember, she wanted 300 to 500. But she puts a brave face on it. Readers are responding well. She's gotten a couple of lovely Amazon reviews. The launch event was great. And she can actually hold a copy of her very own novel. In fact, she posts a picture of it on her bookshelf between Alison Bechdel and Jane Smiley. It's everything a debut author could want, she says. And then she presses on. She applies for awards, pitches to reviewers and bloggers, does promos and discounts and giveaways, and thinks about hiring a publicist. There's something poignant at times about the way that Dieker can straddle the line between real writerhood and self-deluded newbie. One of the awards that she submits the novel for is the Pulitzer Prize. She's excited to discover that you can, in fact, just send your book to Fresh Air or the New York Times. She hears from the New York Review of Books. They're inviting her to buy an ad. Gradually, it sinks in that the novel will not be the success that she'd hoped. A month and a half after launch, she adjusts her sales target down from 3,000 to 500 forgetting that it had originally been 5,000. 10 months after that, having started the entire process with what she calls an advance of $1,600 that she collected over Patreon, the crowdfunding site, she's now about $1,000 in the red. Book sales alone have grossed a total of about $1,600. Meanwhile, Pronoun, her self-publishing platform, has folded, taking all of her metrics and sales data with it. She moves the book to Kindle Direct Publishing, which she really didn't want to do because it's owned by Amazon. She also learns that Goodreads, which is also owned by Amazon, will start charging authors for giveaways, a key marketing tool for independent authors. Self-publishing, she's discovered, does not really give you the kind of control she had thought because you're always at the mercy of the platforms. In the midst of it all, she writes a long, tormented post about the sacrifices she's making for the novel. She's already told us that she will end up having spent nearly every free minute on it for 3 years. Sacrifices including being less available to family and friends. But the truth is, she says, I want it more than anything. I have structured my entire life to have this choice. My job is to get good enough to keep making this choice for as long as I can. So just a couple of more things, a couple of more minutes. First, let me just pull out some themes from what I just wrote, themes that recur throughout the book. Obviously, the incredibly hard work that artists put in. Contrary to what a lot of people believe about artists as indolent dreamers and self-indulgent weirdos, part of what this book was written against. Second, the possibilities the new technologies create, the high hopes those possibilities often give rise to, the difficult realities those hopes often meet, and finally, the incredible perseverance with which those difficulties are met. I wrote this book from a place of intense gratitude for what artists give us. I mean, I'm not going to go into how important art has been in my life, but it's, I think, important in everybody's life. But my understanding of what artists go through and my empathy for them really deepened as I conducted the interviews, because what I also got from them was a tremendous sense of admiration for artists, for their toughness, their resourcefulness, their industriousness, their tenacity, their courage, and also their optimism and generosity. I did not write this book to discourage anyone from being an artist, but I did write it to give people a reality check. I wanted younger artists in particular to understand what they're up against. And I wanted all artists to understand that they're not alone. And finally, for the rest of us, the audience, I wanted it to be a wake-up call. So 2 short passages in conclusion from the introduction. This is about how meaningful art is. The first one is about how meaningful art is to everyone, how important it is. How much time during an average day do you spend consuming art? Not just visual art, not just high art, all art. Narratives in books, narratives on television, jazz on the stereo, songs in your earphones, paintings, sculptures, photographs, concerts, ballet, movies, poetry, plays. Several hours a day, no doubt. Given the way that people listen to music at this point, possibly every waking minute. So that's how important art is. Those are the stakes. Now, the second passage. If most of us are oblivious to the plight of artists now, there's an obvious reason for that. Not only is there still a lot of art being made, there is much, much more of it at lower cost than ever. For us, the consumers of art, there really hasn't ever been a better time. At least, not if you equate quantity with quality or do not worry over much about the workers at the other end of the supply chain. First we had fast food, then we had fast fashion, now we have fast art, fast music, fast writing, fast video, photography, design, and illustration, made cheaply and consumed in haste. We can gorge ourselves to our heart's content. How nourishing these products are and how sustainable the systems that create them are questions that we need to ask ourselves. Thank you. Kate and Lisa, who wants to go first? You guys are each going to talk for like 5 minutes, and then we'll talk among ourselves, and then we'll take Q&A.
Oh my goodness.
I do have something to say, and that is, I think the story you told about the writer, remind me of her name, Bill?
Nicole Dieker.
Oh, that is the story that we think is going to crescendo into, and then she sold 1 million copies. And that I think is like the myth that we've been fed, that if you are disciplined and practice and, you know, that automatically these amazing things will happen for you. And I think the thing I struggle with as somebody who, similar to her, worked really hard and found some level of success, was that I don't disagree that there is this kind of magical combination of things that has to happen. And it's definitely partly discipline and practice. It's definitely partly talent. It's definitely also kind of, it's so many things, but it's partly being in the right place at the right time. And also not having certain technologies or things that you've invested in fail, which, you know, she was sort of the victim of, and who knows what would have happened if that hadn't happened, you know? And I think one of the things that I started to do a little bit a few years ago when I started to become successful was to sort of feed that dream to other people. And I realized pretty immediately that that was not a good thing to do, because what I was suffering from while I was talking about what it takes to be successful was killing me inside, which is like exhaustion, burnout, that in order to sort of get where I got, a lot of serendipitous things happened, but also the hard work that I was putting in and the 7 days a week and the 12-hour days was like not only killing my joy for being an artist, but like physically really difficult. And I think that like on the outside, nobody saw that. You know, I have a big social media following, which of course has helped me build my career, but you know, behind the scenes, there was all this stuff happening that no one knew about. And I definitely am one of those people where, you know, I've definitely built this sort of sustainable career. I have a lot of passive income and stuff now, but it took me so long and so much sacrifice to get there. And my worry is that even if we understand that that is what it takes, most people won't be able to do that. It's just like, I was older when I started. I had a lot of perspective. You know, I didn't actually, this was my second career. So I had all of this sort of like grit build up after years of working for other people. And I had all these skills that they don't teach you in art school. And even for me, it was exhausting. And so I worry a lot about the story we tell about what it takes to get there, and that if you do these things, it will definitely happen, because that's not always the case. And then even if it does happen, it's very painful, the process.
And it's so specific and unique to the person that is making the work too. And I think that what is important for me to kind of pass along to my students is that they are really like figuring out what is the story that they want to be telling, like what is the type of work that they want to be doing, and that this is something that they really enjoy. Because just it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hard work. And if you don't find yourself like fully kind of invested or engaged or rewarded with the creative work that you're doing, it's going to really wear on you, because you're working so hard to figure out how to sustain a life with that work. And so it's so interconnected. And I think that especially with a lot of students in art school, sometimes the business side of things just doesn't really get even thought of. And I find that to be a failing of a lot of either art schools or a lot of art students, to like think that business isn't even going to play into this whole process. Because
and also like disappointment, like the emotional toll.
Yes.
Like that's something we don't talk about.
Absolutely. And it's also something that's so difficult too, because it's like you're in art school and students want to learn about business, but it's so specific to the thing that you're doing too. It's like you can't just take like, here's your class where you're going to learn everything you need to know about this thing that you're doing. So it's so much of it is just trial and error. I know like a lot of the things that I've learned about business hasn't been because of school. It's been because of things that I've just like been learning on my own and screwing up and then trying to, you know, figure it out with other friends who are kind of like working this whole system with us too. But I think you can make those connections in school, and that's what I try to have happen in the classroom, where it's like it's those connections that are so important, and those conversations to have happen, just to kind of figure out how to facilitate a space so that type of conversation can happen too, because it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what do you do? What should an art school do, or how can art schools? And let me also say, you know, in my chapter on art schools, I talk about how there's been this huge proliferation of art schools and arts programs over the last few decades, and since 2008, kind of a collapse in applications.
Mm-hmm.
That's what people have told me, which means that if you want to keep your enrollments at the same level, which you have to for financial reasons, you lower your standards, which means that maybe you're admitting people. I'm not saying you guys do this in your program, Kate. No, seriously. I mean, if you're ethical, but like, you know, you're admitting people who maybe shouldn't be there, but you're not telling them that.
Oh, and I see that happen at private art schools quite a bit, because right. They need the money to keep it going. But I feel like, no, that totally happens. There's so many, I feel like even since 2008, there's been so many like MFA programs that have been created, and then people buy into I'm just going to go back and get my MFA. And then there's a lot of disappointment that comes along with that too, because it's not like this magic cure-all. You get your MFA and then you have a bunch of debt that you're dealing with too. It's so, I think my thing is that I feel very fortunate to be coming through like graphic design, illustration, because I know that it's harder for art students to, I don't know, I feel fine teaching my students like how to commercialize their work. Honestly, that's what I teach, you know. And I think it's harder for art students to be like, well, should I make prints? How do I make prints? No one taught me how to make prints. Whereas like, that's just what you do when you're an illustration student, or that's just what you do when you're a graphic design student. Like that whole kind of like figuring out how to have multiple streams of income from the creative stuff that you want to be making, like that's kind of part of the deal. That's how you make. And I feel like it's harder for kids that come from the art angle to kind of like have that happen.
For sure. Now, Lisa, you didn't go to art school.
I didn't.
You went to school of Lisa Congdon. That's what you told me.
I didn't. And what's interesting is I've given a couple of commencement addresses at various art schools, which is also bizarre. And I'm in talks with one of the grad programs at PNCA to teach the professional practice class there, which is interesting because I didn't go to art school, and yet I'm teaching, you know, graduating MFA students how, you know, or, you know, senior MFA students how, you know, like how to go out and make a living, which is sort of interesting, right? Like you don't actually need a degree to do that. And I'm sort of coming at it from the more practical standpoint versus the sort of theoretical or conceptual standpoint, right? And I'm pretty excited about it. And I've been mentoring in that same program for several years now. And I think that, you know, there is this, you know, people ask me all the time, if you could do it over again, would you have gone back to school? And I think no, because of course things have worked out for me the way that they did. But I do think there are all kinds of things you learn in school which are so helpful in the, you know, when you're a writer or a musician or a visual artist, which is learning to get feedback, learning to, you know, which for writers and visual artists in particular is super important. I mean, I'm sure it is for musicians as well, like, you know, or even actors, like this is how you make your work better. And that's not something you can teach yourself. You really have to engage with other people for that. And I feel like there have been ways that I've gotten you know, professionally, that I've learned to take feedback and not take it personally and all of those things. But I think that's one of the most important things you learn in art school. And then there are all, you know, all kinds of other sort of technical skills that I missed along the way because I am self-taught, which I think a lot of people say, oh, that makes your work very charming. But, you know, I do wish that I had, you know, some more technical skills. But to Kate's point, I think that there are, and I know that Kate in her program, because Kate and I have been friends for a long time, I know that Kate really has sort of not made a separate class around professional practice, but has integrated professional practice into the very program that it is part of every conversation. You know, from the time you start the graphic design program there, you're getting opportunities to get feedback and critique from professionals, and, you know, you're replicating real life situations for your students. And that often happens sort of in a vacuum for most art school students. So they finish and then they go out into the world and they might have amazing technical skill and actually be able to take critique very well, but they don't know the first thing about how to monetize their work or how to, and then there's this sort of third bucket, like, I hate to use the term self-care, but this like third bucket of like, how do I take care of myself when I'm experiencing a lot of rejection or putting my work into the world and it seems like no one is paying attention and I'm not getting paid any money and I'm really poor, so I might have to go get another job, and then I'm exhausted but I still want to make art because eventually I want to do this thing. And then like how to manage all of that too, even when you're super talented, is just it's overwhelming. And
It is overwhelming.
we don't generally, I think there are some exceptions and some programs that really like foster talking about those things, but for the most part we don't talk about those things. And that's why a lot of people graduate from art school, start out and then give up, because it doesn't happen right away and we don't teach the skills for sort of how to manage all of that. And some people make it through because they come with the skills from other aspects of their life, like they had amazing parents or privilege or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because sometimes a lot of those skills are already baked in. And I mean, again, I appreciate you, Lisa, for giving props to what we're doing at PSU, but it's like, it's really hard to replicate real life experiences when you're in school. And the best that I feel like I can do in that situation is just to invite in a lot of professionals to kind of share their stories, share their paths, just to kind of like repeat over and over and over again that this path looks different for everyone. And here you have access to someone who is sustaining a life of creativity, and it looks completely different than the other person that you heard from, you know, 2 days ago. And it's going to look different. And I think the key is that you know, you're wanting to find the thing that you want to do. And I think it's just about making those connections, having those conversations, and just trying things and trying things and trying things, and and being transparent with that too, because I feel like just like you had mentioned this too, Lisa, about how people don't talk about, you know, the self-care aspects or money aspects of things. And I think just kind of like breaking down those quote unquote taboo topics about being a creative, it's important to be transparent about that so you can learn from each other's experiences too. But I wish there was like a magic 10-step rule to like figure out how to be a successful artist, but it's so different from everyone. And I think that's really been my takeaway from teaching for all these years, is that I'm just fascinated by creative people, and I love bringing them in, having them share their stories, and work and talk with students too, because I feel like students get a lot from hearing that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think I'm trying to do something similar in a very different medium in the book, and also I think with the same attitude, right? Like I started this book with sort of that old purist, like art and money should never touch attitude, you know, and that essay I wrote 5-6 years ago that the book grew out of, like I was still in that place, and then I started to interview people, and they kind of started to like get my head adjusted. Like, of course, money has to be involved. So, but like what I really want for artists is to be able to survive in the market without having to become creatures of the market, right?
Yeah.
So I think the bad version of what we're talking about in art school is like you just throw up your hands and teach people to be like cogs in the machine, right? And just kind of, right, forget about their soul. Whereas what you said, I quote you in the book on this, is it's not, you know, you want, like, start with what you love as a student, and then you're going to help them figure out how to make a living doing what they love, as opposed to start with making a living and forget about doing something you love, because then, like, why are you going to art school?
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. And I think it's so easy for us to realize that we have ownership over our education. And when you are a student, it's your right to kind of speak up and be like, hey, I want to learn this, or why can't we do this? Like, I think it's so easy just to kind of sometimes go with the flow. And I think, you know, that ownership over your own education, I mean, that goes into kind of just like ownership over your own life. And so it's really easy to forget that that's something that you have control over, but you have to be an active participant in that process in
Yes.
order for these things to happen too.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it all really goes, it's, and I think that's, I see that sometimes just with students in school too, where, you know, they're like, I'm going to be a graphic design major, so that means that I hope I get hired by an agency somewhere. And I'm like, there's so many different things that you can do with a graphic design degree. Let's show you all these different people doing kind of, again, taking ownership over their life and having control over that, instead of just being like, oh, I hope that this big advertising agency hires me. Because I have so many conversations with students who, after they've graduated, they've gotten the job that they think that they've wanted, and then they come back to me a year later being like, oh, I actually really hate this, and now I feel bad. How do I quit this job? And so, like, that's just another part of the whole process, for sure.
Right, taking over ownership of your education is the first step in taking ownership of your career. I want to go to Q&A, but just one more question, Lisa. I don't mean to be to just focus on the negative, but you said to me, you started out a long time ago, right, trying to build a career as an illustrator, when the internet was still relatively young and sparsely populated. And you said, and you mentioned another person who had started even earlier, that being Kate. And you said, if the two of us started now, we would just be one of 1,000 people who are doing a hip kind of design aesthetic, I think is how you put it. So do you ever think about, or either of you guys, like what it would be like now if you were starting out now? Lisa?
I thought it a lot, actually. Yeah, like Kate and I both, Kate, did you have a blog?
I did.
Yeah, so we both had blogs when blogs were a thing. And we actually met on Flickr.
Like in 2004,
the original
2005.
Instagram, yeah. And I left my job, opened a shop in San Francisco. It had a gallery. Kate had a show there. This was in 2007.
Yeah.
And we were both starting out, kind of starving artists, basically. Kate had, was teaching, so she had probably more income than I did at the time, but we both kind of like were early adopters of kind of technology that would help you kind of talk about your work. And we're both pretty extroverted. So we were also like, all right, we're gonna, we didn't feel shy. And we were also older.
Yeah.
I'm older than Kate, but we were both relative to other people who were just starting out. We were a bit older, and we kind of like were part of that first wave of people who were trying to make a living on the internet as artists. And so, years later, we're both, we stuck with it. We worked really hard. We both have an insane work ethic. And we're doing well, and also complain about being burnt out and have both made various attempts at taking breaks and whatnot. But I know, and I'm sure Kate thinks about this too, like I think all the time, like, okay, what if I just now figured out this is what I want to do with my life, or I got kind of like consumed in following people online on Instagram who were doing the kind of work I wanted to do, just like I did with Flickr, back when there was like only a handful of people doing this online. And I wouldn't have a snowball's chance in hell. Like I entered the playing field right at the right time.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, I've built talent over the years and I've built a following, and I'm not disparaging my own work. I'm just saying, like, there are a lot of really talented people out there. And by the time I became known, I got to do it with less sort of competition. If I don't even think of myself as competing against other people, so it feels weird to even say that. But yeah, and I've managed to find an audience for my work, and, you know, people who want to consume the things that I produce in different forms, like classes and products. And but if I was starting now, I think I would be really intimidated because, you know, especially with the skill set that I had back then.
Yeah.
You know,
No, and I completely agree with that, Lisa. And I see that intimidation factor happen with a lot of my students too. And I feel like we were really lucky because the internet felt a lot smaller. And I also feel like I was a lot more naive in how I would just like put stuff out there, like, oh, this is so much fun. And the fact that there were less eyeballs, I feel like, let me feel like I was experimenting more. I mean, I started when, you know, making, it was called like internet art. Like that was my first like website. Like I was an internet artist. And I also feel very lucky that I did go to art school. I went and I got my MFA from Nebraska in the early 2000s. And I went there though as the only graphic design MFA student. And so I was able to kind of adopt these newer technologies and use kind of design skills in a way as an artist that I feel like a lot of my my art contemporaries felt like they couldn't do, because it just was like, oh, I'm a printmaker, I can't use that, or I'm a painter, I can't do that.
Sure.
And so I felt like I had more freedom to kind of experiment with these like newer technologies too, because I was coming at it from a graphic design perspective. So I feel very fortunate in that.
I want to say one last thing, and that is that
Okay.
the you know, it used to be in the art world you had to be this or this or this or this. You couldn't be all
Right.
of them, and now you can be so many things, which is awesome.
Now you can be all those things. It's great.
Yes, and maybe it's even, you should be, or should be more
Yes.
than one thing. Yeah. Kate, can you curate the audience
Yeah,
Q&A
actually,
for us? Thank you.
It goes, I see one of my students in there actually, and she's got the most upvotes. And Chloe, who is I'm totally not biased, I swear, but she's a brilliant illustrator. I know that she has a lot of angst about Instagram profiles and personal branding and things like that. So Chloe wants us to speak to the phenomenon of personal branding on social media. Are artists out of luck if they don't feel like curating their online persona?
Well, I'm gonna let you guys take this in a second, but I will just say that this to me is one of the big things, and maybe one of the sad things.
Yep.
Or you can dispute that. I mean, you guys are naturally extroverted and feel comfortable with this, but the point is that, I mean, it's never been the case that you only needed art skills to be successful as an artist. Maybe you needed to know how to schmooze with, you know, gallerists or whatever.
Mm.
But the incredible emphasis now in this age of self-marketing and self-branding on this kind of thing, which means that we're selecting for people who are good at that. We're selecting for people who you know, who feel comfortable with this stuff, and the people who don't, no matter how good their art might be, maybe just kind of out of luck. What do you guys think?
Well, as somebody who, I actually struggled a lot in the beginning with this, I used to refer to it, I don't think of it this way anymore, but like almost that I was like a pimp for my own work, you know?
Yeah, I can feel
even
that
before
way.
Instagram, like I would write on my blog and then I would go onto Twitter and say like, look at what I made today. And it just felt so icky and weird.
Mm-hmm.
Now it feels completely normal.
You know, yeah.
But I want to say too that like I figured out for me how to have an online presence that felt authentic and felt you know, didn't feel icky. Like I realized that I was going to have to do this in a way, if I was going to do it sustainably, that felt good to me. And However, I hear what Chloe's saying, and if you're not into that, or even being a person who posts things online, I do think it's harder. I do think it's harder to build an audience. I think it's harder to get work. And I do think there's a way to do it that can feel true to you. And I think that that's part of the work we have to do as artists, to figure out, like, how can I show up in the world as the world is today, which is mostly virtual, and how can I do that in a way that feels good, represents my art, and helps me build an audience for people who like what I do. Like, how can I do that? And it's not going to look the same for you, or for you, or for you, or for you as it is for me, and nor should it. And that's part, I think those are new conversations. And like, actually thinking about this professional practice class that I'm going to start teaching in 2021, I'm thinking about, okay, you know, part of what I need to talk about is how people can figure that out for themselves, because it is a new reality. And I think if we think about it in a binary way, it's either this or it's this, we're in trouble. We have to think more broadly about how we can fit into the virtual space, and like how we can make it work for us. So that's what I think.
No, I agree with you, Lisa. And I do think it's really difficult. I do feel like you do have to have somewhat of a presence online, but again, it's about figuring out a way where it feels good and it makes sense with the type of work that you're making too. And that's a little bit of a harder process to kind of figure out. And it takes a lot of trial and error. And at least for me, I've found, you know, just sharing work that I'm excited about, and just kind of like always having a presence like that makes sense. But I also, you know, Chloe, if you don't want to have an Instagram, you don't have to have an Instagram if you don't want to. There's other ways that you can connect with people and talk to people and things like that. I would be personally sad if you didn't have an Instagram, because I love looking at your work. So anyway, that's selfishly, that's how I feel. But yeah, I think it is. And whenever I teach my senior portfolio class, you know, I'd say, you know, maybe you want to have an Instagram, maybe you don't. Like, let's figure out what way you feel comfortable engaging with people online, in person. Let's figure out what works best for you. But it's important that we have these conversations, because you are going to have to engage with people. So whether that's, you know, through LinkedIn or through meeting people in real life, like you've got to figure out like what's going to work out well too. There's another question. Do we want to take another question? Yeah. Okay, so we have Bukala. Often when books like this are written, they refer to the classic arts, painters, sculptors, etc. But do you think this book is relevant to craft artists, craftspeople, wood, textiles, metalwork, ceramics? Did you interview any artists in the field? And if so, what was their experience? Was their experience the same / similar in this age of tech? Thanks, Bukola.
Thanks. I should say that there are no other books like this. I just want to make that clear. But I'm afraid to say I didn't. I mean, this was a really, really big topic, and I had to make some choices about how I was going to circumscribe that topic. So I also don't really talk about performers as opposed to creators, right? I mean, if you're a performer who also creates, like a singer-songwriter, but like I don't talk about actors. I just had to make those choices. But the reason I didn't talk about performers is also similar to the reason that I chose not to talk about craftspeople, which is that I really did want to focus on the arts that have been most subjected to digitization and therefore demonetization. And one of the advantages of the crafts, and I think one of the things that people love about the crafts now, is that they are actually tangible. They are things that you can touch. And then just one last, I mean, I do think that this book is relevant to even those people insofar as it touches on the things that we're talking about, which is that even if you make physical objects, you're still doing the self-promotion and the self-marketing, and maybe you went to art school. And so, yeah, relevant, but maybe honestly a little less completely relevant.
Excellent.
Buy it anyway, read it anyway.
Okay, Tim asks, in your book you write, but now that everyone can be an artist, everybody wants to. what do you think are some of the biggest obstacles and advantages artists have in the midst of our global pandemic?
Oh my God. Yeah, I've been tracking this. I've been going back, circling back to people I interviewed. I wrote something for The Nation a few months ago, into the, a couple of months into the pandemic. Listen, what we were just saying, digital content has been demonetized. That means you have to do physical objects or live experiences. That's what artists have been told for years. Like musicians, you have to tour. No one's going to pay you for your music. Tour, 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 tour until you drop. And authors make a lot of their money speaking now, including me. That's a big part of authors' incomes. And people who do classes and workshops. Yes, some of that stuff can be done online, and more of it is migrating online. But it's been a huge hit to artists' incomes. And then the fact that the organizations that present artists are closed or are suffering. Film and television production has basically been shut down. Theaters. The jobs that artists do, the day, either if it's a job for like an arts institution or a university, or the day jobs, there's less, service work, restaurants, pulling shots, driving for Uber and Lyft. It's a horrible disaster. It really is. What are you guys seeing, Kate and Lisa, among the people you know?
This has been difficult. It really has. Like, I know that a lot of my contemporaries that are working as designers, like a lot of their work has like gotten a lot less, basically. I know that a lot of people have had to really, a lot of creative business owners have really had to kind of just bust their butts and pivot a lot of the work that they did in real life to online. At least that's what I've had to do over the last several months. I think it's been hard. I mentioned earlier, I teach the senior portfolio class at Portland State for the graphic design students. And it's usually that class is a very stressful class anyway. And graduating in the midst of a pandemic makes for some really, really, really stressful conversations. One of the things, though, I do feel very fortunate that in graphic design and user experience and web development, like those jobs are still happening. Actually, one of the things that have been quite nice over this last term teaching online is that so many professionals reached out about kind of just having more one-on-one conversations with students. We had so many kind of Zoom coffee dates with students talking to professionals. And I felt like there was a really overwhelming generosity from creatives who wanted to reach out to the students because they really felt for them graduating at this time. But I would be lying if I told you that I'm very ready for in real life again.
For this to be over, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to add something, Lisa, or should we go to another
No, let's
question?
move on. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see, what do we got here? Kristen wants to know, how has the role of artists in society changed because of the internet, or has it?
Yeah, well, this is sort of like the big kind of, it's not a theoretical book, but I have one long chapter where I really try to talk about this. And I give a history of what the role of artists have been. And I point out that this idea of artists is people who tell truth to power, kind of countercultural, kind of on the margins of society, looking in, people who we look to speak new truths and to speak unpopular truths. This is not an eternal idea. This is an idea that's about 200-300 years old. And it's dependent on the ability of artists, actually, first of all, to be in the market so they didn't have to rely on patronage, but also to not be completely consumed by the market. So that in the most obvious case, if you're doing client work, you're doing what the client wants you to do. But even if you're not, if you're on the internet and you're competing with the other million people who are on the internet, and you have to do this, and therefore you're making work that looks like what works on the internet. I think that does not make for speaking new truths. Maybe you can speak truth to power, but can you speak truth to your own audience? Can you tell your audience things that you don't want to hear, that they don't want to hear? I am worried that the role of art as an autonomous realm, an independent realm, may be in danger, and art will become like another form of marketing in a certain way.
Mm.
Yeah. Do you want to say something, Lisa?
No,
Okay.
I agree with everything you just said.
I know, I
Okay.
do too. I do too.
Okay.
Well, we have about 3 minutes left. Do we want to take one more question?
Sure.
Okay. The question that just came in from David: how successful are online art markets like Saatchi or Fine Art America or Redbubble?
Ooh, I really didn't look into this. My sense is that they have not been. Well, you guys probably know better. Do you guys know? You answer.
I mean, I don't.
I
I
sell
don't
my
think
own work myself.
Yeah.
you don't do that.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't.
You know, I mean, I guess it depends on what kind of art we're talking about. If we're talking about like the art world art, you know, gallery art. I mean, I looked into this and no one mentioned this. I talked to a lot of people in that world. Galleries still matter. What really matters now are art fairs that are kind of cannibalizing the money that used to go to galleries. But I think if people when the people buy expensive, unique objects, they want to be able to be in the presence of them before they buy them. Maybe that's not universal, but that's the sense I got.
Yeah.
Mm.
No, that sounds good.
Yeah.
That's kind of, it's out of my wheelhouse. I think both Lisa and I operate in a similar way.
Yeah, I mean, I do work with galleries and have shows periodically, but fine art is only about 20% of my practice. So
Yeah.
Okay, Madeline wants to know if we all have any advice for high school students.
Here's what I think, because I've really had to think about this. If you want to be an artist, give it a shot. Because if you really want to do it, which you shouldn't do it anyway, if you don't really want to do it, my life depends on it. Give it a shot, because if you don't give it a shot, you'll be angry and bitter, and you'll hate your parents if they were the ones who are standing in your way. But do it with eyes open, know what you're getting into, and be prepared to give it up if you have to. If it's not working, and don't wait too long to go to plan B. 30, 35 years old, whatever feels right to you, just know that, I mean, don't get stuck, but give it a shot. Give it a shot. That's what I would say.
I want to echo that. I think that's really great advice. I actually had the opposite. Like, I didn't become an artist until I was in my 30s and didn't leave my job until I was 39, and I'm 52 now, so I've been doing it for a long time, but it was a second career for me. And that's, I think, an important thing for young people to understand. And I think that the younger generation is beginning to understand this. Like, when I was growing up, you chose one thing and you had to do it forever. Or you were a failure, potentially, you know. And I think that the beautiful thing about the way the world works now is that there's a million things you can do. So try it. And if you discover that you love making art, but you don't want to make a living at it, guess what? That's totally fine. You can make art because you love it and never make a dime from it, or make a very small percentage of your income and still have a job doing something else. Maybe it's the thing that you are excited to do when you get home from work. It's also possible that you try making art and you do well and it's great. It's also possible that you try making art for a living and you give up by 30 or 35.
And that's totally fine.
It's totally fine, because guess what? It's not too late to go back to school at 35. It's not too late to try something else. And, you know, the brain doesn't actually fully develop until we're 29. So we have so much potential to learn about what we're really passionate about so much later in life. So yeah, try it, but know there's endless things you can do with your life.
There's so many different things you can do. And I think it's so important to know that, you know, the path that you start on is always going to be evolving and changing, and being open to that. And I think it's, you know, when you're in high school, I think it's, if you want to do things like this, like, again, find those people that are working in ways that you want to be working, and just study them and learn them, and see if you can meet them and ask those questions, because I can't stress how valuable it is to have those conversations and to be thinking about, you know, the steps that you need to be taking in order to turn this into a living, if that's what you choose to do, or maybe you just something that you enjoy doing, and that's wonderful as well.
Yes. So I guess we should wrap it up now. I could keep talking to you guys and taking questions for another hour, but
Thanks, Bill.
We all need to
thank
go
you
eat
guys
dinner.
so much.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. It was such a pleasure to host you and to welcome everybody out there in the ether. Please do consider purchasing a copy of the book if you're out there in the audience, The Death of the Artist. The link is in the chat. And please do also check out our other upcoming events. We've got a full lineup, and we hope to see you here again soon. Until then, have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank
Have a
you.
good night.